If you're new to gardening and feeling overwhelmed, don't. Stop it. It's really not as complicated as it seems. Like with most things, you can do as little or as much as you want. This video is a collection of the basics you'll need to know before you get started growing fruit and veg. The first thing on the list is a simple potting mix recipe. I love keeping things simple, and this mix can be used in your pots as well as in your seed trays, so you don't have to buy and store separate soils. Talking about soils, we have a post on our website which goes into detail about the different types of soil and their usages, if the range is confusing. For this simple recipe, you'll need equal parts topsoil and all-purpose peat-free compost. If you have it, you can use your own compost, that's even better. There's not much to it really. Mix the two together in a large container. The topsoil may need breaking down a little as it tends to clump together more than compost, but it's easy enough to do with your hands. This mix works well because it has the best parts of both ingredients. Compost is light and fluffy, which makes it easy to work with in seed trays and is also easy to store and transport. It holds onto a lot of nutrients, which is great for use in pots, and it doesn't harm seeds or seedlings in trays. Topsoil adds some weight and bulk, which makes transplanting easier later, and has good water retention, which is great for pots and trays. If you're only concerned about using this mixture in pots, you can substitute the compost with a well-rotted manure. The second item on our list is weeding and answering the two main questions, which are, what's a weed and when to weed? My definition of a weed is a little generic, but if it doesn't look like the other things in the area and I'm not expecting anything there, it's a weed and it's getting pulled out. Most of the time it's obvious. Like here for example, this looks nothing like my parsnip seedlings, so it's coming out. You can leave the weeds on the ground if they're small. They will wilt and add nutrients to the soil. It can also save you trips up and down the garden. If you use hay as a mulch, you can sometimes get stray grass which germinates. This can also be pulled out. When it's not obvious if it's a weed or not, you can tell by how quickly it grows compared to other plants around it. By waiting a day or two, it may give you a better idea if it's a weed or not. Most gardeners recommend weeding as you go and having it as a part of your normal gardening routine. If you're thinning out your carrots, for example, remove any weeds that you see so they don't become established. Weeds are easier to remove when they're smaller and grow very quickly, so it's best to weed often rather than giving them time to produce seeds. If you do a lap of your garden or allotment every day or two, you'll quickly spot things that are out of place. Transplanting is the act of taking a plant out of one container, normally from a seed tray, to put into another. It can be moving it into a larger container, a raised bed, or straight into the ground. When you transplant, you're often affecting the root system of the plant. This could be when you're splitting or dividing an established plant, when you're transplanting from a seed tray into a pot, or when you're planting a shop-bought plant. In all these cases, you're removing the plant from its container or from the substrate it's in, which can cause the roots to dry out or be damaged. When pushing the seedling or plant into its new home, we're also applying downwards force, which can damage the stem or foliage of the plant, which hampers its ability to grow. With a little care and knowledge, damage can be avoided. There are three main instances when you're going to transplant, but they all share similar steps. If transplanting from an established plant in a pot, step 1 is giving it a really good water. It will hold the soil together, which makes transplanting easier and gives the plant a good drink before going into the ground. Step 2, dig a hole which is the same size and depth of the pot the plant is already in. Step 3, water the hole. This makes the hole moisture the same as the pot moisture, which means the exposed roots won't get shocked or dry out. Step 4, take the plant out of the pot and drop it into the hole. If the plant doesn't come out easily, try squeezing the side of the pot to encourage it to drop into your hand. Don't hold onto or pull the plant, instead place your thumb on one side of the plant and your hand on the other side and catch it as it slides out. Step 5. Fill any empty gaps with soil or compost. And then finally, step 6 is water it again. It's going to feel like you're watering too much, but this will wash soil into any gaps and will encourage root growth and keep the plant secure. Transplanting from a cell tray or individual pods is similar. You should look to move a seedling on when they've developed 3 to 4 true leaves. They'll have more energy and can grow roots faster. A seedling smaller than this will have a harder time growing into its new position. It will happen, it will just be slower. Step 1. Using a dibber or anything which is the same width as the seedling's cell, make a hole the same depth as the cell. If the seedling is particularly tall, which often happens with tomato seedlings, you can transplant the seedling deeper to give some additional stability. If you're transplanting from a cell tray, use the flat end of a pencil and poke out the pod from the cell using the hole in the bottom. If this is a little tricky, water the soil in the tray first so it holds together. Place each pod into its hole and gently press it down at the sides to push the pod to the bottom. If the seedling is particularly tall, bring up the soil to surround and support the stem. Lastly, give it a really good water. Transplanted seedlings get shocked by being moved and having their roots disturbed, but we can limit this by giving it a really good soak. Transplanting from a seed tray is similar to the previous method, only being careful when removing the seedling from the tray to try and not damage the roots. I usually use a small spoon to ease each seedling out. The rest of the process is the same. Make sure you water recently transplanted seedlings more often than you would with the rest of your plants to help the roots establish. Mulch is an organic material that's added to the soil's surface to feed and protect the soil. Mulching is by far my most favourite activity in the garden and benefits your plots in the following ways. It protects the soil from the heat of the sun, it encourages more insects and soil life, it helps retain moisture in the soil, it adds nutrients to the soil, and it protects the soil from frost. There are a couple of things to look out for though. The first is the cost. Mulching is only useful when it's cost effective, but there are many ways to save money when mulching. The second is pests. Depending on what mulch you use, it may protect pests from their predators, so just keep this in mind. I've used the following mulches. For us, hay is the easiest and most cost-effective mulch. As we own guinea pigs, we have tons of bedding after we clean them out, which is also filled with their droppings, which is filled with nutrients. Hay is applied thickly over the surface of the ground, in raised beds or in pots. The worms love it as they're now protected from the birds and can start eating the broken down hay, pulling it down into the soil. A hay mulch also keeps the roots of the plant protected from frost and is great to use when getting things started early in the year or when overwintering crops. Some people find it a bit of an eyesore and it doesn't look very natural. If you're going for a natural look in your garden, this will stick out a little bit. I personally really like it and it brightens up the garden, and once you have things growing, you're not going to see it anyway. Using leaves as a mulch is free, which is a big plus. It's also quite attractive as it just looks like a forest floor. Simply rake up the fallen leaves, twigs and debris from your garden and scatter over the surface. It's got all the same benefits of hay. Using newspaper, in my mind, has a more specific use case. It's fairly unattractive to use in the garden on its own, but it will protect plants from contact with the surface. For example, laying newspaper under a strawberry plant would be very effective at keeping the fruit free from soil contact. It doesn't contain much in the way of nutrients, but it does have the benefit that it can be picked up for free and can be applied much thinner than other mulches. It does also need to be weighed down or you risk it flying away in a strong wind. Applying newspaper under another type of mulch, for example compost or hay, is very effective and makes an excellent weed suppressor. I usually only apply wood-based mulches under my flowers or shrubs, as I've read over the years that it reduces key nutrients in the soil and reduces seed germination. However, after doing more research, it seems that most of the myths simply aren't true. I've linked to a very interesting article in the description which gives examples of growing fruit and veg using wood-based mulches, and I will be doing more in the future. The article does confirm though that seed germination is affected. If you only transplant in your garden, or if you're careful about clearing the mulch before sowing, a wood-based mulch could be very attractive and effective. It also lasts a while too, which could make it cheaper than other methods. Lastly is compost. If you practice the no-dig method of gardening, where you add nutrients to the surface of the soil rather than digging compost in, then you're already mulching with compost. The benefits are that you can make your own, and you know the contents are 100% organic because you added them to the composter yourself. A compost mulch also looks great and makes for very easy transplanting and sowing later. I have found that compost is not as effective for protecting against frost. If you are overwintering, hay would be better during the colder seasons. Thinning is the act of reducing down the amount of seedlings you have in a specific area. This could be done with seedlings in a seed tray, a pot, or directly in the ground. On the back of seed packets, the manufacturer has been very helpful indeed and informed you about how to space apart their particular plant. This is based mainly on the size of the fully grown plant. The foliage of this plant will shield the ground below it from access to light, which would stifle the growth of anything trying to grow there. We also know that plants have a similar root system size to their above ground foliage. Therefore, the plant will take most of the water within that area. We thin our seedlings so they have access to the most light, water and nutrients they can in order to grow to their optimum size. There are two ways in which you can thin seedlings. The first is thinning to remove, which is needed when you have too many seedlings growing in an area. This would usually happen within a pot or a seed tray. We have tomato seedlings here, for example. We sowed 4 to 5 per cell to get a good germination rate, but we only need 1 per cell when we transplant the plant. To do this, reduce the number of seedlings down to the strongest looking one. If you have a small pair of scissors, cut the unwanted seedlings at the base, leaving the roots intact. If you don't have scissors, pinch the seedling out with your fingers. What you're looking out for is 1. The number of leaves, the more leaves the better. 2. The thickness of the stem, the thicker the better. And 3. Is the seedling bendy or straight, the straighter the better. Also, it's worth noting that this can be done in phases. If there are 2 seedlings which are the same, you can wait a few days to find a winner and then thin again. The second reason why you would thin is to spread seedlings. Thinning to spread is where you have an uneven distribution of seedlings in an area and you thin to space them out more evenly. For example, here I've scattered parsnip seeds in a bed and we have a few clusters of germination and some empty areas. We want to move some of the seedlings to the empty areas to space them out a little. Select the smallest of the seedlings within a cluster. We pick the smallest because if the transplant does not work, the weaker of the seedlings has been lost rather than the strongest. I'm going to use a plant label to do this, but you can use anything from a spoon to a stick. Push your tool down into the soil next to the seedling and, while holding onto the leaves with your other hand, gently lever the seedling out of the soil. You may need to dig around the seedling a little and don't be too worried about snapping a few roots, it will grow back. Once you have the seedling out, pick a new location for it, making sure to space it out as per the plant's preference. Using a simmer tool again, poke a hole into the soil at the same depth of the seedling's roots. Drop the seedling into the hole and gently press the soil around to secure it in place. Give the area good water to stop the seedlings wilting. And that's it! The 5 main things beginners should know when starting to grow fruit and veg. I really hope you found this video useful. If you did, feel free to subscribe, and if you have any advice or tips for others, please pop them in the comments so we can all learn and grow together. There's also a couple of other videos here that you may be interested in. Happy growing!